Hello and welcome to Florida Internet and Television's FLITV. I'm your host, Brad Swanson, and we are once again coming to you just a few blocks from Florida's capital. I am joined by Jim Saunders, Executive Editor of the News Service of Florida, here to tell us about what's happening in Florida's capital. Jim, welcome.
Thanks.
All right, so we're in committee weeks right now. Things are happening and moving, but it seems like there's a lot moving that has nothing to do with the process. Senator Latvala, Appropriations Chair, has been accused. We had another senator leave, Senator Clemens. What's happening in the Senate?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much all the preparations for the session have been sort of overwhelmed here in the last few weeks by these sexual harassment allegations against Senator Latvala and also Senator Jeff Clemens, who was the next Democratic leader, resigned from the Senate after there was a disclosure about him having an affair with a lobbyist. So it has just totally changed the tone and the conversations going on at the Capitol. I mean, there's still bills moving and there's still preparations being made for session, but there's just, the chatter at the Capitol is all about particularly the Latvala investigation. He was the Appropriations Chairman, which is one of the most powerful jobs in the state, and he has been removed from that position during this investigation. And so, it's unclear how long the investigation is going to take.
They appointed one investigator, and then that person recused herself, and now they've got another one.
That's right. The Senate General Counsel was Dawn Roberts was originally going to head the investigation, but she's worked with Latvala for years, on and off through the legislative process, and so she recused herself. They've now brought in an outside counsel, an outside law firm, to oversee the investigation. But again, it's unclear how long this is going to take, and sort of how it's going to play out in terms of how the investigation is conducted. Yeah. There's the complaints at this point have all been from people whose identities have not been released. So that makes another angle of it that makes it a little bit tricky to know how this is going to play out. We do know that one Senate staffer has filed a formal complaint against Senator Latvala. Senator Latvala says that he has done nothing wrong. He says, that he made some comments that probably were not always thoughtful, maybe, but he contends that there's some allegations about groping and touching, and he says that categorically that he did not do that. So it's kind of up in the air at this point. He has hired Steve Andrews, who is a Tallahassee attorney who is pretty famous for being very combative and very aggressive. So this thing is, it just keeps picking up speed in terms of the issues. And meanwhile, they got to get ready for session in a couple months.
How did the deck chairs shuffle once Senator Latvala was resigned from his chairmanship?
Senate President Joe Negron appointed Senator Rob Bradley as the new Appropriations Chair. Senator Bradley is, he's been around for several years. He's pretty well respected. He's a lawyer. I think he's pretty well, he's handled a lot of big picture issues. He handled, for instance, last year, Negron had a big proposal about building a reservoir down south of the Everglades. It was a real priority of Senator Negron, and Senator Bradley helped sort of usher that through. He's also been very involved in medical marijuana issues, which have been very complicated. So I think that Senator Negron went to kind of a steady hand with the Bradley appointment to be the Appropriations Chair. This session is going to be a tight budget. I mean, there's going to be a lot of difficult budget decisions and a lot of difficult budget negotiations. So this change from Latvala to Bradley kind of comes at as they're trying to get prepared for all this. And it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out here in the next coming months. I mean, there's also rumors around the Capitol, there have been for a few weeks, that there could be other allegations made against other legislators.
Yeah, insiders are glued to their Twitter feed to see if some new piece of news is going to drop.
And so, there's all sorts of names flying around the Capitol about this. So, there may be nothing to them, and we may not see any more allegations.
Right.
But if we do, and if they are influential people like Latvala, this could throw things further into sort of disarray.
Well, Florida is no stranger. No, it's not unique to Florida, right? We're seeing this trend play out post Harvey Weinstein scandal in all areas of the political spectrum. I mean, Alabama is breaking like crazy right now.
Well, I mean, the Roy Moore issue in Alabama is that's just captured the country's attention as to whether he's, has done what these allegations are. But in legislatures around the country, there have been these cases that popped up here in recent weeks. Big issues in California, Arizona, Illinois,
right.
Kentucky, and some other states as well. There's been allegations. People have had to leave powerful positions because of it. So I tend to think this is not going to go away anytime soon. And if there are more allegations made against Florida legislators or other people in influential positions, this thing could be keep going on for a while.
It's a big deal when these sorts of accusations and these challenges present themselves to the nation's third largest state,
right.
Because it's not just our economy; it has ripple effects across America. Just
well,
like with
and
our
on
elections.
a narrower perspective, I mean, Jack Latvala is running for governor.
Right.
He announced in August he was running for governor. So, I think sort of the conventional wisdom around the Capitol is that his governor's race or his governor's campaign this has sunk his governor's campaign.
Right.
I mean, it doesn't take a lot of imagination to think of the 30-second ads and the mail pieces that could come out after this, even if he's cleared. I mean, but he has not pulled out of that race, and he did raise a substantial amount of money in October, so which is before a lot of this happened or came out. But so there are implications even for next year's elections in this.
Well, Jim,
process.
let's talk about next year's elections because let's stay in the Senate and then we'll go to the governor's races. In the Senate, because Senator Clemens resigned, that's a West Palm Beach or a Palm Beach seat. You've got several legislators jumping into that. Who's in that race? How does that reshape the deck, and what would the Senate look like with the new players?
Well, on a short-term basis, basically the Senate's going to be down a person throughout this session, it looks like. The governor scheduled a special election in April. Now, if there was only a Democratic primary, they could get somebody in there earlier, but I don't think that's likely. So we've got Lori Berman, Representative Lori Berman. She's already in the race, as is...
Key in minority House leadership.
Right, she is a lieutenant to the House Minority Leader, Janet Cruz. So she's already in the race. Irv Schlossberg, who's a former rep who ran against Clemens in 2016, he's also running.
Right.
Also, a Republican has filed for the race, Tammy Donnelly, I believe is her name, out of Palm Beach County. I think, that is a very Democratic seat. So I think the Democrats are heavily favored to win the seat going forward. But there is going to be delay that's going to be open, which hurts the Democrats. I mean, during this upcoming session, not only was Clemens a leader, but they lost. They're already in the minority.
Arguably, he was the architect behind the Tadeo victory down in Miami. I mean, he was a machine.
They pretty quickly voted to have Audrey Gibson, who's a senator from Jacksonville, replace him as the incoming minority leader. But, all of a sudden she has to jump into helping run campaigns for next year that she may have been involved in, but she wasn't running them. So she's got that on her plate. The Democrats hope that they could pick up a couple more seats and continue narrowing this gap that's been in the Senate for a long time.
Right.
So this all could ripple through for the next year.
Final question on that Senate race. So if Irv Schlossberg wins, Representative Schlossberg, will it be the first time a father and a daughter hold positions in the legislature?
Don't ask me these questions so early in the morning. I don't know.
All right.
But it's pretty rare. Let's put it that way.
All right. Very good. All right. Well, let's move from the Senate race to the governor's race. We've got a few new entrants. We've got money or fundraising happening every day. Where does that stand? Who's new?
Well, the newest entrant into the race is Philip Levine, the Miami Beach mayor, who, I mean, it's no surprise that he's running. I mean, he's been traveling around the state for months, and he's also...
He didn't do that for fun? No?
Well, he may have, but I don't know.
Okay.
He did go to Weewa Hitchka, so,
He
you
did.
know, who doesn't want to go to Weewa?
Or Bradley Sausage up here in Tallahassee.
He did.
Right?
So,
right.
you know, that's a long ways from Miami Beach.
Right.
But anyway, so... it's
so
no
he's
surprise.
in his fundraising capabilities?
Well, he had been raising money for a political committee for several months. The other thing to remember about Levine is he's very wealthy personally. So he can put a bunch of his own money into this race. And I think he'll probably have to. I mean, he's not that well known outside of South Florida. So, you know, he's going to have to boost his name ID relatively fast. Right. But he does have the money. He's very wealthy. And so he's the latest entrance into the race. I mean, you know, you got Gwen Graham.
You got a four-way primary? Is that where we stand in the Democrats?
Yeah, I mean, you got Gwen Graham, Andrew Gillum, Chris King, as well as Levine. And John Morgan is still on the sidelines. Right. But, you know, he's still making appearances around the state saying that he may run. If he gets in, that makes 5. Right. That's a lot in the primary. Like Levine, Morgan has a lot of personal money that he could put into a race if he decides to get into it, and he has a lot of name ID. So, you know, on the Republican side, you know, Adam Putnam has continued to raise a lot of money. He's out there campaigning around the state, doing a lot of his breakfast events, and you know, he's doing these sorts of things. So, you know, he is obviously the best known probably candidate really on either side maybe, but and you know, there's a lot of questions about Latvala at this point. Right. We don't really know where that's going to go or what he's going to do. And then Richard Corcoran, the House Speaker, I think most people think he's gearing up to run, but he hasn't announced yet, and he probably won't until after session.
Right. Well, and that's the whole, you know, piece of it is once you're in session, you can't raise money. So.
Right, and you know, so he's been raising money.
Doesn't apply to committee weeks, though. Right.
Well, and he's got a political committee that does seem to raise money.
All right, well, let's talk about a few other folks. So the agriculture, or not the agriculture, the Attorney General's race is huge. We've had 2 of the candidates on this program. We've got a couple more coming. That is on the Republican side. We've got some Democrat contenders as well, or potential contenders as well. Where does that race stand? That's a huge race for everybody, but yet because it's not the top of the ticket, you know, the casual watchers of the process don't understand that that Attorney General has wide-ranging impacts on the state of Florida.
It's a very powerful position. I mean, probably the latest development that I found meaningful was that Frank White, who's state representative from out in Pensacola, who entered the race recently, has put $1.5 million of his own money into that race.
That's a huge deposit.
You know, he got in late. He got in relatively late compared to Jay Fant, a state rep from Jacksonville, and Ashley Moody, the former judge down in Hillsborough. They're all Republicans. So he got into that a little bit late. But when you can put $1.5 million into a race like that of your own money, it helps. Yeah. I mean, Fant's put a bunch of his money into the race too. Ashley Moody has not put that kind of personal money into the race, but she has, you know, led in terms of the actual fundraising and raising money. Right. So that's a very going to be an interesting primary to watch, especially if money starts flying like that. You know, on the Democratic side, there's rumors about other candidates getting in. I mean, Ryan Torrens, who's an attorney down in Tampa, is the only candidate who's officially in on the Democratic side. One name that's popped up recently is Sean Shaw, who is a state rep from Tampa. He also is the son of Leander Shaw, who is a longtime Florida Supreme Court justice and a
real chief of staff to Alex Sink as well. So,
Sean Shaw was the state insurance consumer advocate under Alex Sink as well. So he's been around, and you know, his dad was a real trailblazer too, which I think may help with may help a little bit too in terms of his name idea.
We'll see how that AG race shakes out on the Democrat side. I know the Republicans are not shy as to being out front and raising money and
Yeah, I mean that will be a challenge for whoever gets in, if any other candidates get on the Democratic side at this point.
Well, okay, so let's shift over to the CFO, the Chief Financial Officer of the state of Florida. Jeff Atwater held that race, actually got more votes than any other candidate in both elections, yet it's this quiet
Then he rode off into the sunset.
Right, then he rode off into the sunset, now enjoying his time at Florida Atlantic University. So the CFO job is like, if nothing's happening, it's really hard to get press because all the books are getting managed, but usually it's if something goes wrong that you get press, but then they do the fraud investigations and whatnot. Who's running in that race? Who are we thinking who are you hearing that might run?
Well, I mean, the biggest development lately is that Jimmy Petronas, who was appointed to the job when Atwater left, he was appointed by Governor Scott, he officially said he's going to run. I mean, everybody thought he was going to run. He had formed a political committee that was raising money, but he's in. And the other significant thing, I think, is that he apparently has the full support of Governor Scott. And they've always been close politically. And so he is in, and I expect that he's going to be raising a lot of money. On the Democratic side, it's Jeremy Ring, who's a former senator from Broward County. It looks like they pretty much...
Tech guy, right?
He was with Yahoo in the early days.
Right.
And he's, pretty wealthy. I'm not sure he can finance a whole campaign by himself.
Right.
So, so at this point, it's those two going at it. I mean, there's been a lot of rumors and speculation about Tom Lee, the senator running.
Former candidate for
Former
that slot.
candidate.
Yep.
He ran in 2006.
Former Senate president.
And he has told us in recent weeks it sounded like he was going to run, but we haven't seen him take that leap at this point. Right. So I'm not sure.
And if he goes, that's yet another Senate seat that then multiple people potentially could shuffle a deck, but we'll wait to see.
You're way ahead of me.
That's all good. It's all good. No, it's good. So the political races are going to continue to shape up, and we have until what day? The beginning of session, right? For these folks, essentially to raise money and declare, and then when is qualifying?
Qualifying would be in June, usually late June, I think. I think one interesting thing is that session is early this year, so yes, they will have to stop raising money on January 9th at 7 in the morning or something like that, but I fully expect this session to be done in 60 days, them out the door in March, which would give them a long period of time to raise money and get out there and campaign.
Definitely the main argument for moving session up is to be ready for the election process. The other argument is so that the Florida Lobby Corps can take spring break with their family.
Well, I mean...
And maybe a few folks in the news cycle as well.
That'd be nice. But yeah, I mean, so, yeah, they're going to have to stop raising money on January 9th, the morning of, but... after March, whatever it is, March 10th, it'll be a free-for-all.
Right. All hands on deck at that point. Yeah. Okay, so as we move out of the political scene, we're looking at issues starting to take shape. Last time we talked, it was right after Irma. We actually skipped a show because of Irma impacts, and certainly the hurricane's been on the forefront, hardening, whatnot. What are you seeing with regard to that issue, and what are some of the other issues that are starting to kind of percolate up that might steal a little oxygen in this coming session?
Well, there's a lot of discussion about Irma issues at this point, but it's a little bit hard to see where the legislature is going to go. I mean, this nursing home issue is front and center. Whether they should have generators to cool their buildings after this disaster in Broward County where residents died at a nursing home after Irma. So I think that's an issue that's going to stay on the front burner. The governor's keeping it on the front burner. Yeah. So that's one issue. There are other issues about, an issue came up this week about Department of Environmental Protection going to be probably running out of money to be cleaning debris out of the waterways. There's so much stuff went into the waters during this hurricane that they're going to be running out of money. So I think there's going to be a lot of budget issues like that are going to come up, and they're going to, the legislature's going to have to figure out how much to pay, how much
environmental damage, $50 million to clear just the boats that were
exactly. So there's
Florida's
and that process continuing. It's going to continue for a while. So there's a lot of issues like that. I mean,
well, let's talk about the budget for a second, because the governor's scheduled to hopefully unveil his budget this week. I mean, do you see the governor only focusing on the hurricane, or where do you see that budget coming out?
Well, the governor's already, as we sit here right now, he has not released it, but it's imminent. So, he's sort of given hints. And some of it's going to have to deal with some of these IRMA expenses. I mean, even the nursing homes want money from the state to help put in these generators because they serve so many Medicaid residents. But so there's going to have to be some IRMA funding go into this budget, and it's making a tight budget already tight budget tighter.
Right.
But aside from the IRMA issues, the governor, he's proposing about $180 million in tax cuts, and they're kind of, if you will, consumer-friendly tax cuts. They're not some of the real deep-end things like in the past where they cut the communication services tax or talked about cutting the rental tax on leases, those sort of structural things. It's more, he wants to do sales tax holidays, and he wants to lower like driver's license fees. So, those are things that would probably be popular with it just happens to be an election year. And so that's where he's put his attention on tax cuts. This is his last chance to make tax cuts, which has been one of his priorities from day one.
Do we see the governor doing DHSMV videos to play in every single tax collector's office?
I don't know.
This fee is lowered because
I see a driver's license fee victory tour though.
Yes,
but but there are a lot of other issues he's brought up so far. For instance, he wants to put $50 million to the addressing the opioid epidemic. Again, we're not really sure, haven't seen a lot of detail about how that money would be spent, but I think the legislature is on board as well, that something has to be done to try to curb this epidemic of overdoses but $50 million is a lot of money.
Yeah.
He also has talked about $50 million for the Florida Forever program, also some other environmental types of programs. He's also talked about increasing pay for law enforcement officers. So there's kind of a scatter of issues like that when you add them all up, it's some real money. So I think the thing,
$83 billion. Right.
I think the thing is when you always got to keep in mind the governor's recommendations are just recommendations. I mean, the legislature can take them or leave them, and quite often they leave them. So you got to take it from that, keep that in mind. And the other thing about looking at these budget issues is, okay, so you're going to fund this stuff. What are you going to cut to do it? Right. So, I would think the hospitals are going to be bracing for more cuts in Medicaid payments. We've already seen ACA suggest that that's a possibility. So there are certain issues like that out there that you got to keep an eye on as well in terms of where the money comes from.
Well, the money is definitely the number one and constitutional charge of session.
If they want to get out of here in 60 days, like we talked about earlier, they got to come up with a budget.
Well, it'll be interesting to see how the House and the Senate dynamics play out this year versus last year, and we'll stay tuned to the News Service of Florida for what's happening in the Capitol. You guys are always on top of it. Thanks for your timely coverage. We appreciate it, Jim.
Right,
Thanks for coming by. That's all the time we have for today's episode. On behalf of the 100,000 employees and all the cable providers in Florida, we're happy to bring you this program. But if you want to connect for more stories on Florida politics, please hit us up on our Twitter and our Facebook feed. That will be at FLInternetTV, or hit us up on our LinkedIn page by searching Florida Internet and Television. Thank you for tuning in.